Good evening, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to another Inner Hour. Unless anybody, in a moment, I'll see if anybody has anything you want to finish up from the last series that you didn't get to, and then we'll move into the new topic tonight. Before I do that, as usual, I'm going to take a moment of quiet. I invite you to do the same, just to bring our attention present here from whatever else we may be been involved in today, or whatever may be still occupying our attention. And just relax for the next hour to be present here in spirit together. My taper candle finally ran out, so I'm using a little scented candle, which, by the way, smells great. I really like it. Just pause for a moment, like I said, and take a moment of silence to remember what draws us together and what connects us. Mhm. So, a couple of quick announcements. Ani, as most of you know, Ani tore up her rotator cuff and she's been in therapy for it. Today is a particularly bad day, so she's probably not going to be joining us tonight. She's laying down right now. I imagine that will continue. And also Nechama and Shuli, who are planning on joining us, will probably be joining us late tonight because of other things going on. So hopefully they'll be able to make it. And in case I forget, one of you can remind me, today is Nechama's birthday. So I wanted to have us all wish her a happy birthday. And hopefully they will arrive. And by the time they arrive, I'll remember to do that. But if I don't, I have other people now here that can help me remember to do it. So first, our last series was on what I call transcendence. And so does anybody have anything left over from that that you wanted to add and share with the group that you didn't get a chance to, in terms of comments or insights, or anything you wanted to ask that you didn't get a chance to either? And we'll take a moment or two to make sure we can wrap that up if there's anything still not complete with that. So I'm going to pause and help yourself if there's something. Allison, I just saw your mic open up. Hello.
Hi there. Well, I actually had a question that I intended to email and neglected to. So I thought since so many of the folk on this Zoom are women, that maybe you could talk a little bit more. You did mention a couple of names, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about
Mm,
some
mm,
of the women who have been spiritual teachers and guides and
sure.
part of this transcending.
Yeah, sure. Good thought. I shall do that. I'm going to pause a moment in case anybody else has something else, another question, another comment, just in case those might tie together, and then I'll get to that. Anybody else besides Allison have something you'd like to do from last time around we didn't get to? By the way, I have to tell you, I had to make my own tea tonight because Ani being really sore, and it never tastes as good as when she makes it to me. I'm not sure the secret, but anyway. Okay, so oh, good. Nahama and Shuli just got here. So, Allison, before I get to your question, welcome to Nahama and Shuli. I was telling people that today is Nechama's birthday. So um, I would invite anybody who would like to open up your camera to do that, and definitely your microphones if you'd like to do that. I have I was going to have us all sing happy birthday to Nahama, but we have discovered that the new Zoom features now are all controlled by AI. And a result of that is that anything other than a spoken human voice, it considers background noise, including guitar, including singing, including anything that's not spoken human voice. It considers it distraction and background, and it just mutes it all. So if I were to play my guitar with it, you couldn't hear it. If we were to sing, probably you're not going to be able to hear it, or it's going to be really broken. So maybe there's a way to turn off that feature, but so far in most Google Gemini AI features and in most Zoom AI features, so far, and I'm definitely not an expert on this stuff, I've not found a way to turn that crap stuff off because it wants to take over everything and do what it wants to do instead of what you want it to do. So anyway, that's my that's my rant. But anyway, so maybe one at a time for those of you who'd like to open up your mics, you could just wish Nahama a happy birthday, and I'll just be quiet for a moment. But happy birthday from both of us. Nahama, you missed this, but Ani's shoulder, the rotator cuff's really acting up a lot today, so she's lying down. I doubt she's going to join us tonight, but she wanted to wish you a happy birthday.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Happy birthday, Nahama.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank-
happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Happy birthday. I hope you were out celebrating. Doing a little bit of
Happy birthday from Liz. Happy birthday.
Can I
Go ahead, Nahama. Yeah, please.
am 3/4 of a century old. Same thing.
Oh, great.
Yes, Nahama and I have long joked because we are often on the same wavelength and even on the same topics when she gives the drush in the synagogue. It'll be something I talk about in one of my classes or in our hour. We don't talk about it ahead of time. We find out later. So we've often joked about being, twins born of different mothers. And actually, we're just born 2 days apart. I will turn 3/4 of a century on Tuesday. So there
We're
you
only
go.
days apart. Hence why I call him he and Ani uncle and auntie.
Exactly. Exactly.
Not because they're blood relation. No.
We've adopted each other.
Yes.
We're better than blood relation.
Stephen, did you ever actually ask your mother?
No.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so happy birthday. Hope you're having a great one. And thanks for taking time out in the midst of all that to be with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course.
Alrighty. So Allison brought up, I don't know what you heard before we actually saw you log in, if anything, but I mentioned that if anybody had anything left over from the last topic on transcendence that we didn't get to, I wanted to be able to finish that up tonight before we move into the new one. And Allison brought up that I'd mentioned a couple of other like women mystics and authors, teachers, but not very many. And if I could add some to that, so I'll add a couple, and then anybody else who wants to add any, you're certainly welcome to. There's first of all, I guess one of the things that I want to say is that because most of us are unfamiliar with Eastern mystical teachers, unless they're really famous one like Buddha, or somebody in the like Krishna in the Gita or something like that. We're not so familiar with those traditions, most of us, either Indian or Chinese, and we mostly think of Western ones when we think of that. So anyway, the couple of them that I want to mention, I never remember the city she's from, but there's a famous woman, Christian mystic named Hildegard. And I want to say Bingham or Bingen, or I can never remember where she's from. Sorry about that. I apologize. But Hildegard is one. Um, and she lived in the, oh gosh, late, uh, like 1,000 to 1100-ish AD, as I recall. She was German. And so she has some really interesting writings. There's a very famous one. Um, there's another one that most people think of as a guy, which is actually a woman. It's Julian, spelled like Julianne, not E-N-N-E, but just I-A-N. Julian of Norwich was another famous woman, Christian mystic. And then probably the most famous one is Saint Teresa of, most people say Avila. I believe it's actually pronounced Avila, but Saint Teresa is very famous, another Christian mystic. And Saint Teresa, it was well known for her intense devotion. She is one of the women in Christian mysticism who did occasionally display the stigmata, the wounds where Christ was supposedly wounded, in the hands and feet and side, and sometimes on the brow, bleeding from the brow. There have been a number of Christian mystics, I don't mean scores of them, but more than one that historically have displayed those signs. Whatever you make of those signs, they're pretty well documented, the ones who've displayed those. So she was famous for her devotion and was a Catholic, as you might imagine, from Saint Teresa. She lived in Western Europe, primarily the Spain area, during the 12 and 1300s, which was a very, very active time in Western Europe of Kabbalistic teachings and a proliferation of teachers and students and writings back then, most of whom were male, because in traditional Kabbalistic circles, Jewish mystical circles, you are not even allowed to study Kabbalah, let alone teach it, until you're 40 years old or older, and you're not allowed to study it if you're a woman at all. These are the ancient rules. Some actually still follow that. But during that time, Abraham Abulafia lived in that area, prolific, profound mystic. Isaac Luria, who was actually from Israel, but lived in that era. There were a lot of things going on. And in Western Europe, in the Spanish side particularly, there was a kind of a rare confluence of Sufi, Christian, and Jewish mystics who lived in that area and connected with each other and shared their teachings and practices and experience and texts with one another, which is really largely unheard of in most religious tradition. And so they benefited a great deal from learning about each other, and a lot of it flourished. Christian mysticism began to flourish after that period for quite a while. Kabbalistic mysticism absolutely just was in its heyday for a while there. And Sufi mysticism, at least in Western Europe, got a stronger foothold because of these collaborations, in my opinion. Now, this is also one of the rare times where Jews were accepted in most places in Europe and in certain, not like Catholic circles, but in non-traditional Christian circles, particularly mystical circles. So Jews have been, you name a long-lasting country that's been around for a while in history, and probably the Jews were either persecuted and or exiled or both in those countries. They've had 5,000 years of exile and persecution, and it's still going on, sadly, as you can see, arising in America again now, and in Germany again now as well. But anyway, leaving all that aside, back to the women. So Saint Teresa is one. Her most famous writing is called The Interior Castle. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And she talks about, she uses a castle as an analogy of drawing closer to the king, that you start outside the castle, eventually enter the castle, which is the home of the king, but you're in the outer chambers, and progressively you go through these various chambers or palaces or regions of the castle, and each one has a different, if you could imagine an actual castle and moving through the outer, more public areas to the inner, more residential areas of the royal family, which get much more elaborate, much more lavish, much more beautiful, and eventually to the king. That was the analogy, which was not an original one with her. Kabbalistic writers have used that long before her, actually, and probably others as well. But the idea was your soul goes through an ascent of consciousness and moves into different realms that sometimes were called, pardon me, different heavens, like the third heaven in Paul's writings in the New Testament, or the so famous seventh heaven that many writers refer to. The Sufis have 10 heavens that they talk about. Sometimes they were called chambers. Sometimes they were called rooms. In the New Testament, where Jesus said, my father's house, in my father's house are many mansions. That really wasn't the word in either Greek or Hebrew. It translated more closely to rooms or palaces or chambers, not really mansions as such. But there's a lot of reason to believe he was talking about the very same thing Teresa's talking about, and that Kabbalistic writers have talked about. And that others have talked about in this ascent of consciousness into not only higher states, yes, higher states of awareness, but also quite specifically different actual realms of being that you have to have an ascent of consciousness to even be able to perceive and become aware of. And that these realms or levels of being have characteristic and distinct differences from one another that they describe, as does she in the interior castle. And while her language is all Christian-based and Christ-based and Jesus-based and so on, and God the King, her descriptions themselves are very parallel to Jewish writers talking about the heavenly palaces. There's an entire section of Jewish Kabbalistic writings called Hechalot literature. And Hechalot basically means palaces. And it's a description of how do we make this ascent from physical consciousness, not only to higher awareness, but specifically to consciously traverse these higher realms of being, or these palaces of God's kingdom that we move through as we get closer and closer to God itself, or however you want to name it. And so there's a lot of parallels in her writing, and her writing is very clear about some of the qualities that the soul experiences in this traverse or ascent. And it's also quite specific about qualities the soul needs to be embodying before it can reach these levels. There are certain things that the soul can't be hanging on to and reach these higher levels. And there are certain things that it needs to have developed within itself to be able to reach these levels. So it's an interesting work to me, if you're interested in mysticism, which almost always, most mystics throughout history in most cultures have written something about meditation, something about an ascent of the soul, something about a return to the kingdom or a return to paradise or a return to God, and so on. So Teresa wrote quite extensively about that. She has a lot of private journals, some of which have been published. And she'd gotten so many questions from her sisters and fathers and others in the church that she eventually put the book together as a compilation of her experiences and her understanding from those experiences. So besides her and Hildegard and Julian, there have been a lot of other women mystics. And to be honest, unless you really you can find them, but unless you really do kind of a diligent search, which is much easier now that the internet exists than libraries used to be, they're not very prominent because particularly in the West, I guess really these two, it has been male dominated. And um, most of the teachers that have had large followings have been men. Most of the people who did have followings that were written about were men and written mostly by men, about men. Um, and just as an example in the New Testament, if you, and then I'll get off this topic, but if you read in the New Testament um, about Jesus' family, it actually says he had brothers and it names them. It names all of his brothers. And then it says, and his sisters, and doesn't name a one of them. Typical. Um, there are places where it does name women in the New Testament, and if they are named, they were really important if they were named. And Mary Magdalene is named all the time. But if a woman's named in the New Testament during that period of writing, she was really important and like not possible to ignore from the people who lived in that era, so they had to write about them. But frequently in the New Testament, it will say things like, and Jesus traveled with, and it will name his companions, James and John and Simon Peter, or it will say, and his 12, or it will say this, and it will name the specific apostles that he traveled with, or specific people he met with in the different villages. And it says, and the women's group, or and the group of women. And it doesn't name any of, I mean, sometimes it does, but generally it's and the women. So we're kind of hampered in terms of there were probably a lot more great women teachers than we are historically aware of, just because of that context, sadly. Also true in India, where it's very male dominated, still is, as I understand it, quite male dominated. But there were some great Indian female gurus. One was named Mataji, which basically means our mom or our mother. She lived in the era of Paramahansa Yogananda and met him a number of times, and he wrote about her in his autobiography, Mataji. There was a woman there in Indian literature named Mirabai, who's famous, and her lover, who became her husband, they went through a lot of trials to get together. And it's sort of like, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. I should. It's been a long time since I've read Hindu epics, but he's famous as well. Their love story is what's famous, and it's sort of like the Song of Songs in the Bible. It's that kind of lover beloved dynamic, and Mirabai was very prominent in that, and a lot of what she did and taught was in that. There's a lot written in Indian literature about them, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name. So there's also in the Self-Realization Fellowship, she is now passed, but after Yogananda died, he passed the leadership of his Self-Realization Fellowship to a man disciple who lived a very short period, and then a woman took over. And she was president and director of Self-Realization Fellowship for decades. She finally got older and retired and passed. And I think there's another woman, maybe the head of it now, but I'm out of touch with that. That could be wrong. So in the yogic tradition, you can find more women teachers than in the sort of philosophic traditions, maybe. But those are a few actually that you could check out. And there's one Ananda something, another woman from India who's a prominent guru that teaches and sometimes comes to the West. And then there's one in the Southwest area of this country called Guru Ma, just Ma, M-A, like mom. And I don't know if she's still active or not. She was very popular in the 80s and 90s with a number of people. I had a friend who was a disciple of hers for a while. Don't know if she's still active or not, but anyway, there's a few others that I didn't mention, and then probably leaving out some important ones that aren't coming to mind right now because I wasn't planning on talking about that, but hopefully that helps. Anybody else have anybody you'd like to add that you think was a famous female spiritual teacher, mystic, along those lines? In the Catholic Church, obviously the Pope, the papacy is a male only, as are the cardinals. So that's been all male dominated, of course. But anyway, so Allison, was that helpful at all? Any of
Thank
that?
you. Yes, it was very helpful. And,
Okay.
I had supposed some of the things that you mentioned, that because of so many societies being dominated by only one gender,
Mhm.
I was sure that that was
Yeah.
part of the issue, but it was great to hear about these people. And I'd
Yeah.
like to do some further reading on that. Thank you very much.
Sure. The Mataji from India was interesting because she had a rather large, I'll get to you in a sec, James, rather large following. And again, during the like late 40s, early 50s, kind of when Yogananda was building his reputation in the Western half of the world. And she was famous for a number of things, but one of which was she didn't have any teachings at all. What she would show up at a group and smile at them and they would meditate, and then she would walk around and hug everybody. That was her message. And what everybody took from that and wrote about her was that her message was God is about love. The whole point of life is love. And so while she didn't leave any writings that I know of at all, and I don't know of any oral teachings directly from her either. Her she was taught by presence, if you will, and people reported remarkable things in her presence, states, enlightenment moments, healing moments, various different things like that. So she's an interesting one to look into. James, you had something you're going to add?
Oh, just two things. Hildegard von Bingen.
Bingen, thank you. I was getting
Yes.
there. I was getting there.
Yeah, no, she wrote music. That's how I know her from my wife.
Right.
And then there was actually, believe it or not, a Pope Joan
No kidding.
around the 12th or 13th century, very,
Wow.
very briefly.
News to me. Did not know
I
that.
remember reading one or two lines about it somewhere
Wow.
long time ago.
Wow.
But yeah,
Well,
cool.
thank you. I was completely unaware of that one, James. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that one's real obscure.
Helps to have a historian in our midst.
Yeah,
So.
sometimes.
Thank you for both. Yeah. All right.
Hey, Stephen.
Yes, Liz, go ahead.
This person is hopefully alive. She was alive 10 or 15 years ago when I met her. Because you talked about that woman who just smiled.
Yeah.
I think I may have shared this with you. I went to Chicago because I have a Buddhist friend who said, "Oh, you got to come do this with us." And I cannot tell you right now the name of this woman, but there was bazillion Buddhists that showed up, and we were able to get like in the handicap section, so we got closer.
Yeah.
Anyway, this woman, I don't remember her giving a talk, but what she did was she hugged everyone.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was profound. It was profound. I went into instant meditation. I was like, whoa. They're like, sit down, Liz, sit down. And my friends gave me a lot of time before they asked me to get up. And it was really profound. I wish I knew her name, but
That's
anyway.
awesome.
Yeah.
I've mentioned in other places, it wasn't a female, it was a man, but Reb Shlomo Karlebach was famous for, he's gone now too, but he lived in our time period, was a father of a friend of mine. And he was well known for, if he came to speak somewhere, whether it was a synagogue or guest speaking somewhere, he was well known for he wouldn't start teaching until he'd hugged everybody he could find in the room. So that was
Wow.
a big deal. And it was a profound experience, actually. I mean, I was at one of those with him, and it was really quite moving. Anyway, Shuli and Hama, go ahead.
That was me. before, you're gonna have to rely to Auntie that our weather report for tomorrow and Tuesday, we have two different heat advisories.
Yeah.
For 112 and the other is 113.
Oh,
So
she feels so bad. I may wait till she feels better to even tell her that.
yes,
Wow.
is we saw this one's also for James. Me and Mommy saw Moana on Wednesday
Oh
with
yeah.
our friend who lives in California, and I actually enjoyed it so much better than the original animated.
Yeah.
And I thought that they showed the culture, that they
Oh,
added
interesting.
culture and the traditions and stuff. So I
Interesting.
recommend the movie, the live action, than the animated.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
I'll check it out. Thank you.
I've not seen the live one, so thank you. Yeah.
No problem. I know it's a kiddy animated Disney, but
Right, right, right.
this is the live action version of the animated. But yeah, anyway,
Cool.
so much better. The person that came to mind, the woman, in our time period is
Pema.
yeah, in the Buddhist world is Pema Chodron.
Oh, yeah, Pema, of course. Yeah. She was actually one that popped in my brain earlier and then went out again. But yeah, she's a Buddhist teacher that's very well known and has written a number of books and travels and very good. She's kind of like a female. This isn't really fair to either one of them, but she's kind of like I think of her as kind of like a female Thich Nhat Hanh. You know, she's from that tradition and she has a lot of similar, I think, similar energy. But yeah, and also, of course, we didn't mention Shefa, but Shefa Gold is really a wonderful teacher, I think, and uses music extensively and chanting. I've
Mother,
mentioned. Sorry,
mother of chanting.
Mother of Chanting, yes, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Shefa Gold, if you're ever anywhere, she's mostly works on. She doesn't come to the mid. I don't know that she's done anything in the Midwest that I'm aware of, but she does a lot of things, live programs, and she also has a number of books out that are wonderful. She what?
It's in Minnesota this week.
Oh, is she? Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, but if you
Actually,
ever get to hear her, she's great.
she's actually, you'd like this. She's at the Episcopal House of Prayer with a combined group of all sorts of people.
Nice. Yeah, nice. Good for
Also.
her. Good for her. Yeah. Yeah, I met her, as you guys know, at one of Rabbi Cooper's silent retreats, and just I ended up kind of going to her workshop or chanting workshop by accident, not by accident, but not really intentionally because a long story, but anyway, the uh, I ended up not getting to the one that I wanted to, and hers was a little bit later, and I went to that one, and I was so glad I did. It was great. So
Yeah, she's a pretty awesome teacher.
yeah, yeah.
I was also thinking of, what is it, Akiva's wife, Berea?
Yes, yes.
You
Yeah,
know, she go to the Talmud and she lay tefillin, which
yeah.
women aren't supposed to do at, get a little later in time,
I
And
know, I know,
and she was helping him get through some of the challenging things that were happening.
for
And
sure.
you read the stories in the Talmud.
Yeah,
So there, I think in each tradition, these people, there were women, but they just didn't get written up because we weren't the ones writing.
oh, I think so too. I think so too. Rabbi Akiva, for those of you who don't know, was a very famous first century Galilean rabbi. Lived just after Jesus, just right after him, and also was killed horribly by the Romans. But his wife was an amazing person too. Um, yeah, Gandhi's wife actually. Gandhi's well known. Gandhi's wife did, and some people don't know that so much. When Gandhi was ill or ill-disposed or during one of his fasting protests, if he wasn't able to speak and had been scheduled to speak, she would go speak for him. And she also ran he had an ashram as well as a political movement, and she ran the ashram during all his absences and travels too. So she was very, not really known for teaching, but she was very, really important contributor to his work. So, all right. Yeah, good, great question, Allison. You brought a lot of good stuff forward. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else on that before we shift gears a little? All right. We're not going to shift gears a whole lot because the topic I want to talk about tonight is kind of a transition topic, unless we do more with it, is on on the idea of service and what serving really is from a spiritual perspective, and what a servant really is. And so I wanted to tell you we mentioned a couple of people already. One of them is Gandhi, who is really big on that. And this is a true story. If you saw the movie, I think there's a scene in the movie that has this. But as he was struggling to gain India's independence from Britain, and developed his whole ahimsa nonviolent political resistance movement, um, they were having a large meeting of some of the major leaders. And in India, there was at that time still a very, very strong caste system. And the lowest level of that had priests, warriors, there's a number of things in the caste system, from very high elite to the lowest. The lowest were the untouchables. And the low class were servants, not actually slaves, but servants, and more like we might think of almost as indentured servants, although it wasn't that specific setup. But it wasn't just like you hired them to help out around the house. It was a caste they were born into and couldn't get out of. And so at this meeting, they had somebody from the servant caste, who was bringing in refreshments to this group of great leaders, political leaders who were gathered to try to work on this conflict. And as one of the servants was carrying in this very heavy tray laden with tea and whatnot, um, in front of not only in front of the leaders, but in front of the press that was gathered, went over intentionally and very visibly and took the tray from the untouchable and patted them on the shoulder, which you're not even supposed to touch them, which is why they're called untouchable, and took the tray from them, which you do not do. And he went around and served all the people in the room. And he took the position of an untouchable, which he did on purpose to demonstrate something to them. For those of you familiar with the New Testament, there's a scene toward the end of Jesus' life where before what's now called the Last Supper, before that, they're all gathered at table. He gets a foot washing basin, which all homes had back then, because people were mostly barefoot and a few had sandals, and the roads were really muddy and mucky and dirty and dusty and all that. So it's common to have a place for people to wash their feet before they come into a home. So he took one of the wash basins and a towel and literally went around to all 12 of his apostles gathered at the table and washed their feet, which again wasn't a caste system, but it was a servant role. They did have servants, and they had slaves in that era. And so it was a slave and or servant role. And he took that role to all his disciples, some of whom got upset with him for doing it. But that was the point he made, was if you want to be in positions of leadership, you have to be willing to serve the people you're trying to lead. And so that was very Gandhian. I mean, it was a very similar example in their cultures and time of doing something kind of outrageous to make the point. So Gandhi did that, and so did Jesus. And this is a quote from Gandhi, from his autobiography, actually. And it says, "Genuine spiritual service has no meaning unless one takes pleasure in it. If your service is done for show, or it is done for status, or it is done for fear of the opinion of others, then it is not service and ends up crushing the spirit. Service that is rendered with no joy does not help either the servant or the served." So that's an interesting teaching that's, I think, not stressed enough often in spiritual circles that do talk about service. For example, if I were to go down to a soup kitchen next weekend and spend my lunch hour serving the homeless at a soup kitchen, um, that would be, from my perspective, that would be a compassionate act. That'd be a kind thing to do. It would be a good thing to do. It certainly would be a helpful thing to do. They need the help. Um, that in all ways would be a good thing to do. But if I went down, I could go down with either the attitude of, I resent this, I'd rather be doing something else. Why don't these stupid people put forth some effort and try to get a job? What's wrong with them? And I went down and I did the work, but I did it with that attitude. That would be very different than going down with the attitude of, I want to do whatever I can to lend a bit of a hand today at lunch. I'm going to go down and help out. And then I felt good to be able to connect to those people, to treat them like human beings, to give them some dignity, to help them feel a little better. And that made me feel good. I enjoyed doing it. That's a very different way to serve than going down with this cranky or awful attitude. Or going down with yet a third attitude of, look how holy I am. I go down every Saturday. And so, my cousin, one of my favorite cousins, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago unexpectedly, for years, I did not know this until he died. And we were close, but I did not know this because he didn't talk about it. For years, he drove 2 hours from where he lived in Ohio to a homeless shelter here in Fort Wayne that provided homes, meals, clothing, and stuff. And he spent the weekend serving meals and helping people at that shelter, and then went back home. I mean, he worked full time at a difficult, stressful job, and he would take his weekend off and come here and do that. And he did it for decades. And I never even knew he did it. His wife told me about it, when I was talking with her after he'd passed. I had no idea he did that because he didn't do it to impress anybody. And so the attitude of service is spiritually really significant, both to us who are trying to be of service and to the people that we're trying to serve, which I think Jesus conveyed through his action as well. Gandhi also taught, this is not a quote, it's kind of a paraphrase, but Gandhi also taught that through genuine selfless service, an individual who is struggling with their ego could transcend it. That being of service to others helped us forget about our own egos. And so he thought it was valuable in that sense as well. I'm going to give you two more quotes. And one is from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And this is something he did say and also wrote. Everybody can be great because everybody can serve someone else. So he kind of connected the idea of being a great person had to do with your compassion, your willingness to help others. And Mother Teresa said two things. Both of these are short, but I thought they were great encapsulations of her energy. I did get to see her in person once, and it was amazing. Really little person, really short little person. So here's the first one. This is like Martin Luther King's. Not all of us can do great things, but everyone can do small things with great love. So it's that same theme idea. And the other thing she said was this, and I had not read this about her before. I just found this recently. And this is a quote from something she wrote. I am not sure exactly what heaven will be like, but I know that when we die and it comes time for us to stand before God in judgment, he will not say to me, how many good things have you done in your life? He will say to me, how much love did you put into what you did? So I thought that was a really interesting perspective. The last quote I'm going to give you is from Yeshua, and this is from Mark 10:42. So Jesus called them together them here refers to his 12 apostles. Jesus called them together and said, I want you to know, this is again toward the end of his life, I want you to know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people. Their officials like to flaunt their authority over those under them, often making their life even more difficult. But among you, it must be different. Anyone among you who wants to be a teacher or a leader must be willing to be a servant, a humble servant. Any of you who thinks they should be first must be willing to be last and be a slave to everyone. Even the Son of Man has not come to be served, but to serve. So that was a really important thing in the ministry of Jesus. And to make my last statement, then we'll open it up for comments. I think it's fair to say that our world is having a lot of trouble right now in many places, not just the United States, and in many different aspects of life. And there are lots of causes for that, I'm sure. But one of the things that I cannot not see, that I can't unsee, that I can't not notice, is that so many people in leadership positions these days, particularly in our federal government, but in other institutions as well, in synagogue leadership, in church leadership, in corporate leadership, in private business leadership, in neighborhood association leadership, you name it, if it's a leadership position. There's an awful lot of people who do not display the attitudes that we've just been talking about. They display what Jesus said, that they lord it over their people. They like to flaunt their authority and sometimes make life more difficult for the people under their authority. I think that's happening widespread because of the degree of selfishness and greed that's present now in many areas. And while the founding fathers of this country were certainly not perfect human beings, as is no one, but one of the things, if you look back to that period of time, they did their best. They didn't succeed in certain areas, but they did their best. And Franklin, for one, really fought for this, to make sure that anybody in a high position of federal government, sadly, it didn't apply to the Supreme Court, but had term limits. You could only serve so long and then you were done. You had to go home. Because politics was never considered to be a career. It was a public service function. And then you have people like Washington and Jefferson, for example, before the days that there were term limits on presidency. Washington, after the Revolution, when he became the first president, was petitioned by Congress to become king of the United States for real. And he declined and said the United States was never going to have any kings. And so they set up the office and he took the presidency. And then he took a second presidency and they refused to go further. Jefferson had a second presidency and the same thing, refused to go further. Like, nope, that's enough. Jefferson went broke serving in the federal government of our country. Many of the leaders of our early country became more impoverished, not necessarily broke, but sacrificed a lot because they left their businesses and fields to serve for 2 years or 4 years. And the idea was it was a service position, not a career that you did for a life, and especially not a lifelong career that you got rich off of doing. That was just inconceivable. And so while there certainly was corruption even back then, I'm not pretending there wasn't, there was a different attitude about what it meant to serve in high office. And I don't think this is a party issue. I think this is a human consciousness issue right now of that so many people in so many positions of leadership do not have Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Yeshua or Mother Teresa's idea about what service really is, and are in it for themselves and to empower themselves. And often the people they're supposedly serving are certainly not foremost in their minds and hearts. So that's my little tirade. You may or may not agree with it, but it seems to tie into this. It's hard not to notice that in talking about a service theme. So James, I'll go to you first, then back to Nahama and Julie.
Okay, now. Okay, so yeah, thank you. One thing I started reading the Old Testament, or no, the New Testament. I'm getting to the Old Testament. Started reading the Gospels a couple months ago, and one thing I noticed about the first three is that Jesus performs these miracles.
Yes.
At first, before he gets to Jerusalem, and he's telling all these people, "Don't tell anybody."
Absolutely.
And now I can't remember if I'm dealing with a whole like 5 different things right now, but I can't remember if you brought that up or not. But I thought that was very interesting because it's like, no, I do this because I do this.
Exactly.
I don't want attention. I don't want accolades or anything. And another thing I noticed is I don't think he ever said worship me.
Oh no, he never did. Absolutely
never. And so for me, it's kind of, it was a real eye opener because I had a certain view of Christians, certain persuasions, and it's like, oh wow, this is cool. So
yeah,
but those are my thoughts.
No, that's great. And yeah, very important, especially the Gospel of Mark. It's sometimes called the secrecy gospel because every time in Mark, and in Matthew and Luke to a degree as well, but every time in Mark that he does a miracle, does a healing, does anything out of the ordinary, he's like, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody I did this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, James. I have not mentioned that. Yeah, Nahama or Shuli or both.
Mommy this time.
All righty.
What came up for me when you were talking about service, especially, is that we have to ask ourselves, where's this coming from? From ego, we can tell because of our reactions to what we're doing and strutting and this and that.
Yeah.
About helping, we're just doing it, and we go to what's called Second Harvest here, where we fill
Food
baskets and boxes
Yeah.
for people that don't have access to food.
Yes.
And when we don't get to do it, we're saddened. And when we leave and we're done and we've worked harder than we've worked, the rest of the month, we're worn out, but we feel so good simply because we know what the energies that we put into that are going to continue to give.
Yeah.
It's not about me getting, it's about the passing on, and that energy continues. And I think that's really, really important. And whenever I'm drawn towards something, I have to ask myself, what part of me is this feeding? And that way I know if ego's involved or not.
No kidding.
And that's an important thing for us to learn to distinguish within ourselves, whether it's my ego or it's my soul that I'm feeding.
Yes.
That way. And I always want to feed my soul because that's what brings light and love into my heart. Doing things that touch my soul and open me to other people. If it's ego, it generally tends to close us down.
It does me, that's for sure. Yeah.
So
you can, I have just watched other teachers in other settings, whether church settings or synagogue settings or just mystical study groups of some kind of settings, and not a particular tradition. The people that are really coming from spirit, coming from a place of love and compassion, the effect they have on, I'll say audience, that's not the right word, but I can't think of the right word, but the people that they're, talking to, the effect they have on them is far more different than the people who obviously are really impressed with themselves and want to show off their knowledge or their credentials or their, I'm big stuff. And it has a very different effect on people. And I mean, I'm just sitting in the congregation or the audience or wherever I'm um, at least from my perspective, watching people's reactions, I can see that while certain very knowledgeable and skilled orators who are impressed with themselves might intellectually pique people's curiosity with their knowledge or whatever, their hearts really aren't moved. Whereas the people who are genuinely coming from a sincere place that's not about them, it gets somehow in deeper to people and it really touches them.
Right.
Or at least that's been my experience so far.
When someone is speaking from, I have the truth, the I is a giveaway.
Yeah.
It's a giveaway
Yeah, for
because
sure.
you might have wisdom
Right.
to share. And I could share something with you, and you could look at it from another direction
Mhm.
and explain it in an entirely different way, but we're talking about the same thing.
Exactly. We
But if
often do, we often do that. Yeah, you and I often do that.
we absolutely often do that.
Yeah.
We're talking about the same idea and sharing it with people. And because we're all so different, that's how it's going to be. And if somebody says, I have the truth, they're not going to listen to those variations
Right.
and a limit. And it's not going to be something that opens us all to one another with loving kindness. It's what's going to close us off to one
Yeah.
another.
Amen. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. I think that something James said a minute ago is important to me because I've spent decades doing studying Yeshua and the early Jesus movement, what he really probably really taught and what they really did before they became, the Christian church 300 years later, basically. Uh, and and I think that a lot of people, including some really close friends of mine and even some family members of mine, um, their attitude toward Christians, their negative attitude, those who have negative attitudes toward Christians, tend to have developed those attitudes from one of two things. Either they have been unfortunate to stumble across Christians who are ego-centered and think their job is to save everybody in the world. And the first thing they ask anybody is, are you saved and are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? And if you're not, come to my church because all the other churches do it wrong. Those kind of Christians give all Christians kind of a bad name to people that they become intrusive toward and offensive toward. And I think people who've met a lot of those kind of Christians have a bad attitude toward Christians. I think the other bad attitude that some people have is what they've been told about the New Testament and what they've been told about Jesus, they don't like. And so they have a bad attitude about Christianity. And the sad part is that a very large amount of what they've been told is false. It's not only false about him, he didn't do or say those things. I got to think, I wish I could show you this. I don't have it on my computer. Somebody sent me, I'm going to try to find one of these and actually get it. And if I find it, I'll wear it. You can see it. It's a t-shirt. It's a big t-shirt. And it's like an artist's rendering of the face of Jesus, traditional kind of face of Jesus. And he's got his head in his hands like this. And it says underneath it, I never said that. And so I'm going to see if I can find one. But a lot of things that just were falsely attributed, but also so many things that Christians promote that they say, like, unless you believe that, you're going to hell forever. It doesn't actually say that. There's so many things about heaven and hell that Christians teach that are actually not biblical, that it's amazing to me. So when James was saying he read the Gospels and went, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting a different picture." Well, yeah, and I'm glad you are because, and even well, anyway, we can talk more about that another time, but but actually reading, whether it's history or whether it's scripture of East or West, instead of reading what somebody says the Gita says, go read the Gita. Instead of reading what somebody says the Quran says, read the Quran. You know, instead of reading what somebody says Jesus said, go read what what we have accounts of him. And there are accounts of him outside the New Testament that we should read too, and Josephus and Philo and Tertullian and different historians, as well as the non-canonical Gospels. But I think I think I think the idea of service, selfless kind of service, or at least non-ego-centered service, genuine spiritual service, I think that's important because that relates to kind of the heart of most mystical teachings, is to make these higher ascents or to experience this greater sense of oneness or to connect to God, or all these different ways we kind of try to talk about these experiences. Almost all traditions, you get to a point where they say to get to these higher and or highest kind of intimate, in-depth experiences, it has to be approached in love and humility. And you can't have those experiences if it's all coming from ego. You can't power your way into the kingdom, so to speak. It doesn't work. And so I think that the serving in love theme touches into kind of the core mystical teachings of the quintessential essence one experiences of the divine is what we call love, and that spirituality is more the depth of love and compassion we experience and express than it is the knowledge we acquire. So I personally know some very, very knowledgeable people who intellectually have a lot of information about different spiritual traditions, but the ones I'm thinking of, I do not consider them spiritual people because they're very rigid in their thinking. They're very ego-centered. They're very uncaring and kind of elite, and none of those are what I associate with spiritual qualities. So anyway, gosh, it's 8 o'clock already. Holy cow, this went by fast. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm not sure what we're doing next week. I'll send out a notice, but I have an idea of what I might be doing. There's two collection of writings that most people are unaware of. One is called the Didache, which is a Greek name that means teachings, and one is called the Gospel of Hebrews, or the Gospel of the Ebionites, because it was the Ebionite group that collected and kept this Gospel of Hebrews alive. They're the same thing, Gospel of Ebionites, Gospel of Hebrews. It's a very, very early collection, supposedly, of the actual teachings of the apostles after Jesus was gone. And it's very much in line with the core teachings of Yeshua that we do have in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Thomas, and in some other places. And one of them, the Didache, was actually a manual or a handbook for people who wanted to join the movement, the Yeshua movement. And it was kind of a consolidation of, this is what we believe, here's how our community is structured, here's things that if you want to live this kind of life that Yeshua taught, you need to do these things and you need to not do these things. It's a really interesting collection. And I've never taught that before. and I'm thinking about maybe doing that. I know not everybody's interested in Jesus as such, but it's a much broader application. If you are interested in, there's some real historical, interesting parts of that you might find, but it's just broad spectrum. It's kind of quintessential spirituality, at least from my view of spirituality. So if I can, I'm thinking about putting that together. But in the meantime, if somebody has something that sounds really interesting to you that may not have anything to do with that, if you have a topic you'd like me to address either next time or in the near future, please email me. I do read them, I take them seriously, and I try to get to them. So if there's something you're really hoping we can kind of do together that we haven't done, write me and we'll get that in there too. But all right, so we'll wrap up there. But I will let you know this coming week what we're doing next Sunday for sure. But I may bring some of those in and see where we could go with that. So. All right, thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful week. Nahama, I hope you have a wonderful birthday season. And
Thank you.
yeah,
And you
and
have
thank
an
you.
awesome birthday come Tuesday.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and would appreciate prayers for Ani because she's really struggling with some things right now, and her shoulders. I mean, it is the PT is helping and all that, but it's a slow and painful kind of process, and it's typically worse after the PT for a while before it starts getting stronger and better. So it's a tough.
Could we also do my aunt?
Oh, please, James. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, she's unfortunately only got a couple more days left. So
Yes. What's her name?
Lois.
Thank you.
Okay.
She's the Michigan one, right?
Yeah. She turned 100 February. So
Wow.
Yep.
So easy passing for her
yeah.
and for all the people who love her and care about her.
Yeah. I'll be there Saturday for 2 weeks. So
Okay.
Mm.
I'm sure you're going to have your hands full, but if you end up wanting to talk and or want to meet or something, let me know.
Will do.
I'm not doing any traveling till September, any traveling other than maybe a few hours away or something between now and September. So.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Yep. All right. Love you all. May you have a blessed week and thank you for being here. I really appreciate all of you. All right. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
We
Good
love
night.
you. Bye.
Love you too. Good night, everybody.